Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Robert Alt, president of the Columbus Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society, and your host for today's panel, which is co-sponsored by Patrick Lewis with the Cleveland Lawyers Chapter and Joseph Ashbrook with the Cincinnati Lawyers Chapter. With us this lunch hour, we have two distinguished and interesting guests who are both legal rock stars in their own right. First, Judge Chad Readler sits on the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit and previously served as Principal Deputy and Acting Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division at the United States Department of Justice. And second, David DeVillers is a United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. He previously served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney as well as Director of the Organized Crime Gang Unit for the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in Columbus. You all have the opportunity to submit questions today using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screens. U.S. Attorney DeVillers, as most of you on this call know, is in the middle of some high-profile cases. Accordingly, neither he nor Judge Readler will comment on pending cases, so please don't ask about them. With that brief introduction, let me go ahead and hand off to Judge Readler. You have the floor.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to all three chapters here in Ohio with the Federalist Society, and thank you to the Federalist Society for hosting this program. Robert, I've been called a lot of things, but rockstar is probably not one of them, so I appreciate that introduction. I'm sure Dave does as well. Well, I have to say I have a lot of appreciation and affection for my time working at the Department of Justice. I'm actually sitting in a conference room in my chambers that we sort of call the DOJ room because I put up a few pictures from my time there. So over my left shoulder is a picture actually of the building at 901 Pennsylvania Avenue, the main Justice Building. And the picture behind my right shoulder is the Attorney General Sessions and I in the Attorney General's conference room. I know Dave feels the same, and he actually has been a longtime employee of the Department of Justice and now has risen to be our U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District. And I spent about 2 years at Main Justice, 2017, 2018, and part of 2019. So I think we're going to talk a bit about our experiences there. For Dave, it's still ongoing. And talk also a little bit about what the department does. I mean, it's been just so newsworthy for many, many years, but especially in recent years. Pretty much every issue in American law, but really in American life, touches the Justice Department in one way or another. And so it's quite a remarkable place to be. And the nice thing about doing this program with Dave is that he has been for many years very active here in the Southern District and knows how U.S. attorneys' offices work, which is really where the bulk of the work is done for the Justice Department across the country. And I had an opportunity to work in Main Justice and and I can share a little of that perspective today as well. So we have a PowerPoint we're going to share, but I thought we might first, Dave, talk about how we got to our positions at the Justice Department. As I mentioned, you have been at DOJ for quite a while. I started in 2017, and I think especially getting these political appointments, there's a lot of serendipity involved. And I'm having a lot of flashbacks sort of at this point in time because 4 years ago, I was really packing up my life in Columbus and my time at the Jones Day law firm where I worked for 20 years to transition to Main Justice. And so it was quite a time for me. And I'll give you just a little sense of that to sort of tell you what it's like to fill up an administration and what it's like to begin that sort of job. So I had helped with some campaign litigation for the Trump campaign and then for President-elect Trump after the election. And I'd worked pretty closely with Don McGann, who was a partner at Jones Day in our Washington office or in the firm's Washington office. And that gave me some opportunities to, again, both do litigation for the campaign, but then with that litigation having gone well and far more importantly, Donald Trump being elected president, that gave me a chance to maybe work in Washington, which is something I always wanted to do. I clerked on the Sixth Circuit and did want to get back into government service at some point. I didn't know it would lead to extended government service, but at least for some period of time, I was hoping to go to Washington. So I really had no idea what I wanted to do. If you're not a sort of Washington insider, I don't think you know kind of how all these jobs fit together and what all the different departments are and how the jobs work within the different departments. And I was just incredibly fortunate to be asked to serve as the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Civil Division. And the Civil Division is the component of the Justice Department that litigates most of the major civil cases from defending executive orders of the president to defending rules and regulations issued by agencies to some immigration enforcement and a number of other things. But as transitions work, and you're seeing this now because we're going through a transition, it's not easy to fill a government. Your very top level positions obviously have to be confirmed by the Senate, and that happens very quickly for some positions, but can take quite a while for others. And then the next level positions are basically appointed by the president or the incoming head of the agency, and those don't have to be Senate confirmed, but it does take a while to fill out those positions as well. So for me, although I had a relationship with the Trump campaign and with Jones Day, which was involved in through Don McGahn, sending some lawyers to the administration. It was really after January 1st in 2017 that I knew I had a chance to work at DOJ Main Justice. And I think there are a lot of lawyers over the last month who have been, or people just going into the administration who have been trying to figure out, will there be a position for them? What sort of position is it? Do they want to take it? And so it's really quite a busy time behind the scenes for a lot of people who are thinking about heading to the executive branch. So I probably had about 3 weeks. I ended up starting on January 30th. I didn't start on January 20th. I started on January 30th because I had some things I had to finish at the firm. But it was probably the first week of January or so before I knew I had a position. So I really had about 3 weeks to reorient my life from Columbus to DC. And I'll just give you a little story about how some of you have heard some of this, but it was really quite a rush for me. The firm was really wonderful in the sense they let me leave the partnership in that short amount of time. But I had an appellate argument that I agreed to do for a client in the 11th Circuit on January 26th. So on Thursday, January 26th, I was in Jacksonville, Florida, arguing my last case in private practice. I flew back to Columbus on the 27th. I said goodbye to my colleagues who I'd worked with for 2 decades at Jones Day. On the 28th, I packed up my office because I didn't have time to do that on the 27th. On Sunday, the 29th, I coached my daughter's 6th grade girls basketball game and then packed up a rental car with clothes to last me for a few weeks to drive off to Washington to stay at an English garden basement I had found on Craigslist. So not a particularly romantic version of Mr. Readler Goes to Washington, but that's sort of what the situation demanded. And I think some of you have heard this part of the story, but as I was driving into Washington on that Sunday night, getting ready to start on Monday morning, I was having some mouth pain, and I figured that was sort of nerves, big job, new experience, and I figured it would go away, but it didn't. On Monday morning, I woke up and ended up needing a root canal, my first morning in Washington. So I go down to the department, I meet the HR person and explain that I am here and I am going to come fill this job, but I have got to find a dentist. It turns out there's one about 2 blocks from the department. I went there for a morning root canal. Came back to the department at about 1 o'clock, unfortunately still suffering from Novocaine and other after effects of surgery. I met with my staff. I'm sure that was a memorable meeting for them, and sort of tried to explain who I was and why I was there. About an hour later, one of my colleagues runs into my office and says there's an emergency meeting with the Attorney General. And I'll be honest, at that point in time, I didn't fully know who the Attorney General was, not because of the drugs, but because it was just because Sally Yates was holding over as the Deputy Attorney General in the Obama administration. She was holding over to run the Justice Department until General Sessions was confirmed. And so she was the acting Attorney General at that point in time. And there was a meeting to discuss the travel ban, which had been issued the previous Friday, so I guess like 2 days earlier. And I also was probably the only person in America who had sort of missed that this happened because I was just transitioning my life so dramatically from Columbus to Washington that I really wasn't watching the news. And that was a matter that would be litigated by the Civil Division. So my first afternoon there, I'm up at the Attorney General's office for a meeting about the travel ban. About 2 hours later, General Yates announces that she won't be defending that executive order. An hour or so later, she's fired by the president. And that's my first day on the job at the Department of Justice. So David, I hope your transition was much smoother. But I'd love to hear about both how you got first involved at DOJ and then, how you rose to be the U.S. Attorney.
Thanks, Judge. So I started, of course, I've been in the U.S. Attorney's office in Columbus since '92. And as an AUSA, you have some interaction with Main Justice DOJ, but for the most part, you're within your office. I was a little different in that I had a lot of overseas experience, and that I worked in counterterrorism. I did some things in the Middle East. I traveled to the Middle East for some war crimes cases as well. So I had some interaction with criminal division and counterterrorism division within the Department of Justice. And then later on in my career, I also worked through OPDAT, which is our overseas arm of the Department of Justice. And I was the resident legal advisor in some former Soviet republics and some Eastern European countries as well. So I had a little bit more experience. Did some stuff with MLARS too, which is our money laundering asset recovery division and section within DOJ. So I did that, and then came back, back and forth to Southern District of Ohio, where I mostly did organized crime, some money laundering, white collar stuff, some cartel stuff, and a lot of violent crime stuff. So once President Trump won the election, which took a lot of people off guard, I think, including me, I was approached by some individuals, seeing if I was interested in putting in for the spot as U.S. Attorney, and I was. So Senator Portman ran a committee with a lot of individuals. I think there were 20-something individuals. I think Mike Kreitz, who was the former U.S. Attorney here in the early 90s, was the head of it. And they interviewed us, and in the end, they selected 3 individuals for Senator Portman, with to also, in consultation with Senator Brown, to select to go to White House counsel for the president to decide. And it was myself, a fellow named Greg Hartman, attorney out of Cincinnati, and another, Carl Caden, was currently my criminal chief, and he was an AUSA in Cincinnati. So in the end, we met with Senator Portman and some individuals, and in the end, he didn't select me. He selected Greg Hartman, who, from what I understand, I've never met the man, is a good attorney. And so I went about my business as an AUSA for about a year or two, and I'm actually in D.C. I have a capital case review where we're deciding whether someone should receive the death penalty or not. And I'm in the airport. I'm flying back, and I'm just on my my phone, kind of looking at local news, and sure enough, it pops up that Greg Hartman has dropped out and is no longer interested in being U.S. Attorney. I'm thinking, huh. And then the phone rings, and it's a 202 number, and I pick up the phone, and it's Senator Portman, and he's like, "Dave, Senator Portman." I'm like, "Hello, Senator, how are you?" I says, "I'm well. Do you know why I'm calling?" I said, "Am I Plan B?" He kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, you're Plan B." So that's kind of how I got it. I was the afterthought, but I'll take it. So this was 2018 tail end, and so at that point, General Barr is just coming in. So General Barr, I think, was confirmed not long after I met with him. First, I met with the White House Counsel's office, people from EOUSA, the DAG's office, and the AG's office that work, that are not the senior level individuals. And, interviewed with them, and then met with Attorney General Barr in D.C. and Rod Rosenstein, who I knew. The same thing. It was probably 6:30. AG Barr I've never met before. He just had his tie off, his sleeves rolled up, and very informal guy. And when you meet with him, he's extremely informal. And he asked. He said, "Dave, why don't you come with me? Rod's on his way. He's in the middle of something. He was getting called to the Senate to get yelled at for something he didn't do, but which he's used to. So he was doing that at the time. And I went into the AG's office. The first thing he asked me, he's like, "So Dave, what's your juice?" I'm like, "My juice? I don't understand, sir." And he says, your political juice." I kind of laughed. I said, "Sir, I don't have any political juice. I'm a Plan B guy." And then I explained kind of what happened, and he seemed to like that. Then Rod Rosenstein came in, we talked, and we interviewed, and it was a good interview. Then he recommended me to the president, and then I was nominated shortly thereafter, and I went through the same thing that the judge went through with the Senate's questionnaire, which is a monster, but got that done and went through the confirmation process, and it was relatively smooth from then on.
Well, great. Why don't we just turn to talking a little bit more about the department in particular? And I have a PowerPoint here I'm trying to pull up, if I can get this to work. So this is a picture from the Great Hall at the Department of Justice. I'm sure Dave has been there many times. This is where a lot of major awards presentations and discussions and substantive programs take place. It's just a really wonderful space and a really outstanding and wonderful building. And if any of you are in Washington and you have a friend who's at the department somewhere, I would encourage you to look them up to see if maybe they get you in the building. But this is really one of the crown jewels of the building in my sense. And from my time there, I always enjoyed spending time there and the different programs that were offered. There's a story which I'm pretty sure is true about the statue on the left, the female statue, that when General Ashcroft was the Attorney General, that he had a black gown put over the upper half of the statue. I guess it didn't quite meet with his stylistic tastes. But no drapes during the time I was there, and the building itself is really a marvelous place. I thought we might just talk for a minute about the leadership at the department. I'll tell you first where this picture was taken, then Dave and I can just tell you a little bit about our perspective on what it's like to be the Attorney General from our respective views. This photo was actually taken in Cleveland, and the individual to General Sessions' left is Justin Herdman, who just recently resigned as the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Ohio. So Dave's colleague for a couple of years. This was an effort to announce a civil division prerogative regarding opioid enforcement. You all recall that before the pandemic, opioids are probably the number one public health issue facing the country in many ways. And the department's criminal division, which was led by Brian Benchkowski, who's on the far left of the picture, was obviously very active in prosecuting people who were illicitly trafficking opioids. But the civil division wanted to have some role in that. And so we found a way to pursue doctors who were overprescribing opioids and to try to, through TRO and preliminary injunction proceedings, try to either suspend or take away their licenses, or at least their ability to prescribe opioids. And as it turned out, it may be no surprise to this audience that unfortunately two of the doctors who were we first discovered were targets for this kind of relief were based in Ohio. So General Sessions flew out to Cleveland and we announced this initiative. And I think it's been ongoing through the rest of the administration. And I suspect it's something the current administration will focus on as well. But it was a real pleasure and honor to work for Attorney General Sessions and for the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. They're both terrific leaders. And I will just say, objectively, being the Attorney General is a very difficult job. The department faces so many issues and so many difficult issues. And the Attorney General has to balance being the chief law enforcement officer with, all the legal and political considerations that flow around Washington and being a part of the administration, but also in many ways being independent from the White House. And it's just a very difficult job. And in the last administration in particular, I think both General Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein had critics all across the spectrum. One day there was one group that was upset with them, and the next day a group on the other side of the spectrum was mad at them. And so it's just really a lot in those jobs that you have to take on a day in, day out basis. But one of the things I really admired was, one, their leadership, and two, how well they treated everyone who worked for them. They always had our back. And, by those people in those offices taking kind of all the political arrows that are flying around on the various things, a lot of the rest of us, like myself, who was in a litigating division, to just do our jobs, to go out and litigate cases, try to make the best arguments we could and win cases on behalf of the department, and not have to worry about some of the other things that were going on. So I really admired the two of them. And Dave, I think your experience is probably more with General Barr and a couple of different deputy attorney generals.
Yeah, so Attorney General Barr, and then of course with Rod Rosenstein was around for a little while, and then it was Deputy Attorney General Rosen. Again, great experience. The same thing, Judge. It really is kind of do your job. A lot of autonomy, especially as U.S. Attorney. They have some priorities. They're always there to help. I think the judge and I talked about this earlier. I have no idea why anyone would want to be Attorney General. It's a thankless job. And people, you get it, forget it. You get it from both sides of the spectrum, depending on what the case is or what the situation is. And my experience with every attorney general I've dealt with, quite frankly, is they really wanted to do their job. They're professionals. They wanted to do what was right. They had priorities based on the administration, but in the end, they all wanted to do the right thing. That's been my experience.
And Judge Garland seems like an inspired choice for the job by the Biden administration, and presumably will be confirmed before too long, and will take over the department.
Yeah.
So what Dave and I really wanted to do is just give you a little bit of sense of kind of how the department works, and both from the Washington perspective and from the perspective in the field of a U.S. attorney running a district. So one way to help do that was just to show you the organizational chart for the department. One, this gives you a sense of structure, and two, it might give you a sense of scope in terms of the scope of the work the department does, because you can see in all these different boxes or different components, and they span from things like civil and antitrust law to criminal and national security issues to the Marshals Service and the Bureau of Prisons and all the U.S. attorneys' offices. So the scope of the work really can't be understated. If you want to kind of make some sense of the chart, the left side of the chart are components that, by and large, work on, generally speaking, civil issues. So the civil division, the litigating divisions, they're on the left, the civil division, the civil rights division, antitrust, tax, environmental section. They're really doing what's, sort of your bread and butter civil type litigation at the department. And then on the right side of the chart, you have what I would call traditionally the criminal side of the house, the criminal enforcement parts of DOJ. So you have the criminal division and the national security division, but you also have, again, the Marshals Service and the U.S. attorneys, the Bureau of Prisons, and all the boxes on the right report up to the Deputy Attorney General. The boxes on the left really first and foremost report to the Associate Attorney General. That's the third ranking person at the Justice Department under the AG and what's the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General. So the Associate traditionally really oversees a lot of the civil aspects of the department. The DAG directly oversees the criminal aspects, and then the DAG reports up to the Attorney General, who obviously runs the entire department. So I want to talk about a couple of the different components in the department, especially to give you my sense of how things work from the civil side. And then I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about give his perspectives. But in the middle of the chart, you'll see 5 offices that report up to the DAG and to the AG. And so they're separate from the litigating divisions or all the other components. Those are really components that serve the entire Justice Department. So one, for example, is OPA, Office of Public Affairs, which helps, with the public messaging that the department provides. But there's one office in particular I would be remiss to not emphasize, and that's the Office of Legal Policy. And that office, by its name, does help advance policy perspectives and interests of the Attorney General, whether it's a criminal law issue. The First Step Act, for example, was passed during the Trump administration, and the AG, probably both AGs, I think it may have been both AGs, but would have weighed in on different aspects of that with Congress. Nationwide injunctions was an issue that was pretty significant during the administration, and OLP helped do some work on that and get the Attorney General speaking on the issue. But the other thing that OLP does is they help shepherd through judicial nominees. And David, they also help with U.S. attorney nominees as well?
They do, yes.
Yeah, so it's a critical job, and we both probably personally appreciate their efforts. So obviously the president makes nominations, the president nominates judges, the president nominates U.S. attorneys, and the Senate has to confirm them. But the group of folks that really shepherd things from the president, from nomination to confirmation, is the Office of Legal Policy. So they help you, I think for judges probably and U.S. attorney nominees, they help you fill out your Senate questionnaire, which is a pretty intense experience. I think my responses were about 100 pages total. You really have to disclose everything you've ever done in your career, and in some respects personally as well. Then OLP will do a moot court session with you before your hearing, which is really helpful because they study these things. They know what question centers like to ask. And then after your hearing, there's a time when you get questions for the record. You have like 2 weeks to respond to, in my case, I think it was 200 questions that the senators, thoughtfully provide to you to give them additional information after the hearing. So that office is really critical. And I know probably everyone who's ever been confirmed either to U.S. attorney job or a judge really appreciates their work. I'm just going to mention two other components that I think in many respects are the most important components at the department. And I'm not going to mention the AG or the DAG or the associate, which those jobs sort of speak for themselves. But the Office of Legal Counsel and the Solicitor General's office have a tremendous impact on how the executive branch is run, how legal decisions are made in the entire executive branch, and how the department operates. So let me start first with OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel. It's in that middle section of the chart. It's an office made up of just outstanding lawyers, as is the SGs office. Previously OLC has been run by William Rehnquist and Antonin Scalia. So it's outstanding lawyers, but that office is sometimes referred to as the law firm for the executive branch. OLC is not involved in litigation. So once a matter goes to litigation, OLC isn't involved. But pre-litigation, OLC gives binding legal advice to every aspect of the executive branch, including the White House. So one interesting contrasting of being a lawyer at DOJ versus being a lawyer in private practice. At Department of Justice decides the legal position for the United States in any legal matter. So if I had a matter I was litigating for the Department of Energy or Health and Human Services or DHS, they may have passed a reg they want us to defend. They may give us a bunch of legal reasons why it's defensible, but DOJ at the end of the day decides which arguments they're going to make, which is very much unlike being a private practice, a lawyer where you'll give your client your best legal advice, but if they say, "I really want you to argue X and Y and not Z," so assuming that's ethical, that's probably what you're going to do. So the prerogatives are a bit different, and OLC has been delegated that power by the Attorney General. And so if anybody has if someone in the executive branch has an action they'd like to take, and they have questions about the legal implications or the legality of doing so, OLC is the one that issues opinions and tells from the agencies to the president, to the White House, what you can and can't do, what's legal and what's not legally defensible. So it's a tremendous power. So every executive order that's issued, for example, would go to OLC before it happens, and they would review it and at least comment in some respect to sign off on it. So it's a really critical job at the department. One place they impacted so many of the cases I worked on, but one in particular that might be of some local interest was when Ohio and Rich Cordray resigned as the head of the CFPB, and as a result, he appointed his deputy as the successor. The president appointed Mick Mulvaney at the time to run the CFPB, and so only in the Trump administration you had two people running the same agency. And it was left to the courts to resolve who was the actual legally authorized head of the agency. And OLC had written a very extensive memo to the White House explaining why they thought the president had the power to make this appointment under the Vacancy Reform Act. And then that was one of the issues that I personally litigated in court, and we prevailed on a preliminary injunction to have Director Mulvaney put in place. The other office I'm going to mention is the Solicitor General's office. You're all familiar with the SG's office because they argue all the cases for the United States in the Supreme Court. So it's just an awesome job. There's about 20 lawyers there. Two of them are political, but the rest just serve from year to year, and in some cases for decades. The lawyers in that group are incredible, both intellectually and then given their experience level in the Supreme Court. But the one thing about the SG's office that I wanted to emphasize that some of you may not know is that they basically control all of the appellate litigation that's litigated through the Department of Justice. So obviously they take control of cases at the Supreme Court. But if the department loses a case in district court, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think this is how it works. The department can't take an appeal unless the SG's office signs off on the appeal. So I had more or less carte blanche, I guess, control over cases in the district court, although on very high profile cases, obviously you'd want input from higher ups to the department. But if I lost a case and wanted to appeal, I had to have the SG's office sign off, like literally sign a slip that would then authorize us to take an appeal. And if we were the prevailing party and there was going to be an appeal, the SG's office would be able to influence what arguments we would make. So we were appealing and we're going to defend the judgment, but maybe there was an argument where they said, we don't want you to make that argument, and we wouldn't do it. So the SG's office controls which cases get appealed and in what courts and what issues get raised when. And that's a tremendous power because they then influence how cases, what precedents set, how cases work their way up through the federal appellate courts, and then of course which cases ultimately are teed up for potential review by the Supreme Court. Dave, what do you want to add about this? And then let's move into a discussion of kind of how your work in the district balances out with the work of Main Justice.
So looking again at this chart, thank you, judges. In the kind of the left side, you have the civil division, antitrust division, and tax division. They have criminal components as well, and those divisions on the kind of the left side of the chart, we do a fair amount of work with, particularly civil rights division and tax division. They have their own attorneys. In fact, a lot of you may know Rich Rowland, who people think is an AUSA in the Southern District of Ohio. He's actually not. He's in Main Justice Tax Division, but is embedded here. It does a lot of cases, of course, here. Civil Rights Division, we've got a couple of cases going on right now, quite a few actually. And for the most part, the AUSAs handle them, and we have to get approval from both civil rights, antitrust, and tax on indicting particular cases. Most of the other cases, other sections and divisions, we have to confer with sometimes, but we don't have approval. These divisions we have to get approval on. Right now we have I think a police shooting where we have a civil rights division attorney working right now, Main Justice attorney working right now with our AUSAs investigating that case. And in tax cases, we often have the same thing, and we usually try to use Rich Rowland. So coming over to the right side of things, you'll see the FBI, DEA, ATF down here as well, as we work with, of course. The Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys, EOUSA, that's who we as U.S. attorneys work with mostly, in that they're kind of our liaison to everyone else in DOJ. Often my first phone call isn't to the DAG, it's to EOUSA to get advice on how to do certain things or to get contact with certain people. Then, of course, you have the U.S. attorneys, which is myself and 93 other U.S. attorneys. You have the criminal division, which has a number of sections, and I'll get into that in a second. But to the far right, this is the section or the group that I usually don't want to hear from. So the National Security Division is great. They're really intelligent, really bright people, but it seems like every time I want to indict an espionage case, I'm denied. And we usually go with the theft of intellectual property, those sort of things. So every time I get a call from the National Security Division, I usually, cringe a bit. Then you have the Office of the Professional Responsibility Advisory Office, which is what you call when you're about to get in trouble. And then, I'm not sure if you can see it, but to the right, there's the Office of Professional Responsibility, who calls you when you're already in trouble. And then you have the Office of the Pardon Attorney, which I've been sweating out the past 72 hours with. But so we get requests on individuals either have been already convicted, people that are currently indicted, which you may have an idea why I was worried, and also individuals that we're actually now investigating. So we get requests, and of course, yesterday I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to read the pardon list, and we were fine here in the Southern District of Ohio, but there was some worrying that was going on by myself and some of my people at the AUSA's office. So going to criminal division has sections. Okay, so within the criminal division, you have OEO, which is the Office of Enforcement Operations, and that is pretty much who we go through to get wires, T3s. Anytime we want to do some electronic surveillance where all individuals don't know they're being surveilled, we have to go through OEO, and we have to throw affidavits at them. They work with us. They bring it up to the Deputy Attorney General, and we can't do anything until the DAG, him or herself, actually signs off on those every T3. They can have a designee depending on what they're doing. Rod Rosenstein would always do it Thursday nights, so we always kind of knew when we would try to get our timing done on our T3s. MLARS, which is a money laundering and asset recovery section. They help us both nationally and internationally get both restitution for people and seize and forfeit property with our colleagues overseas and nationally. A lot of our Bitcoin cases where we're trying to get money from international drug trafficking and things of that nature, we get a lot of help with MLARS. The sections in the criminal division are, for the most part, almost always support as opposed to substantively doing things. That means almost all the prosecutions are through the U.S. Attorney's Office with support from these other sections. Public integrity section, that's what whenever we're going to try or indict somebody that's an elected official, we have to go through them. If they're a statewide elected official or a federally elected official. If they're a locally elected official, we do not. So the Larry Householder case, even though he was the statewide Speaker of the House, he was not elected by the statewide, he was elected by his own constituency. So we didn't have to. We did eventually talk to them and confront and also consult with them on our charges and our indictments, but we're not required to. Same with your county officials, city councilmen. We don't have to go through the public integrity section. There is the Office of Internal Affairs, which helps us out in extradition and MLATs. So if we're extraditing people from a foreign country, of course, we go through there, get our preliminary arrests. They work with the individuals in those countries. We do a lot here in the Southern District of Ohio with Mexico, of course. Colombia, Panama are the kind of the newest things where we're extraditing people from. Italy, we just did one from. In the UK, we have another one pending. Officers Overseas Development and Assistance and Training, that's OPDAT. And I worked with OPDAT overseas for a while, and that is kind of where we work with them on transnational crimes, corruption, money laundering, those sort of things that we have an interest in the U.S. Fraud section, a great source of help for us. CSIPs, which is Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section, very support-oriented, extremely with the change of technology. The law is based on the change of technology. Fourth Amendment issues, they're extremely helpful. Every day we get some sort of guidance from them. Child exploitation and obscenity section, again, we get support from them. They have attorneys as well. We kind of have that down. We have Heather Hill here in Southern District of Ohio, who is a guru and has a lot of people working with her that have that down. We have the organized crime section and gang section within the criminal division, and that's RICO, violent crimes, we call VICAR counts that we deal with. We're actually pretty good at that in Southern District of Ohio. We've done a lot of RICO cases, so they have attorneys that can come out and try these cases with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but since we kind of have that down, we don't, but we do go through them. We do need approval for certain charges from them. And then, of course, a capital case unit, who we actually do a lot with as well. Most of the cases, murder cases that we indict here are death-eligible offenses, even though we don't seek death on very many of them. We have on 3 cases. We actually have a person on death row cases here in the Southern District of Ohio. We rarely do, but we still have to get approval from the Attorney General to seek or not seek death. So we actually meet with a committee in DC and explain why we don't want to seek death. Often it's because of just the complications of it. Often there's 3 or 4 people we are going to try at the same time. And if you're going to do a death case, you can't do that. Really, you have to divide them up. So, and it's also working with the families on what they want to see happen. So those are the sections that we deal with mostly and who we interact with on a daily basis here in Southern District.
And Dave, would you agree? I think it's fair to say, so on the civil side, for example, the civil division has 1,000 lawyers in Washington, and when I worked there, and in some ways we kind of had a right of first refusal, so we would take the cases we wanted, and then for one reason or another, if we weren't going to handle it, either because it was better handled by the local office or something, the U.S. Attorney's Office would take it. But on the criminal side, it's sort of the reverse in that most every criminal matter you're running out of your local office with little involvement or oversight by DOJ, and it's the rare case where Maine justice would be involved. Otherwise, you sort of just control those cases on your own.
That's exactly right, Judge. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a distinction between kind of how the two are set up, but it's really pretty seamless at the end of the day. So I don't know if you wanted to spend time on this, Dave. I guess I take it this is the chart that shows the various U.S. attorney districts, which line up, I guess, with the district court sections around the country?
Sure. We have 94 districts in Ohio. We have 2 northern and southern.
One of the pieces of history I don't know the answer to are, I'd be back to guess, are states like Alabama, Tennessee, and North Carolina are smaller states but have more districts than, for example, a much bigger state like Ohio. I'm guessing that was an opportune senator at some point in history, maybe.
I know that's the case for some of them, and some of them it's Indian territory. I know Oklahoma is because of Indian territory.
Yes, yeah. So interesting history that I don't know the answer to. So I take it this is our local southern district.
It is. So the southern district, northern district are almost, as far as population, it's a little under 6 million each. So they're very similar in size. Although we think this census of the southern district will be significantly larger than the northern district. And I say that, and Justin Herdman, who just resigned, of course, has heard me say this forever, is we have 18 less AUSAs in the northern district, yet we're going to be larger in population than the northern district. But as the judge will tell you, as far as changes go, it's very difficult within DOJ and the districts. It's very slow. It's very kind of glacier-like. Some of these large-scale changes in the districts takes a while, but I'm working on it. So this is the structure of our office. Of course, it doesn't have all the AUSAs. We have about 70 AUSAs in this office. That's in our offices are in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Dayton. We have a number of different chiefs. Of course, I'm the U.S. attorney. Underneath me is my first assistant, which was V. Paul Patel. And we kind of, it depends on the relationship between the U.S. attorney and the FOSA first assistant and kind of who does what. A lot of it's based on V. Paul's got extremely strong in administrative and personnel skills, which kind of leaves me able to kind of work on the case-based mentoring and programs and strategy element of the things. Although we interact, we each do certain things that other ones specialties involved in, but that's a very important relationship because the skill set of your U.S. attorney and FOSA, should not be the same. They should be different, and I think a lot of districts try to do it that way. Then we have Carl Caden, who is my criminal chief, who I mentioned before. Carl was an AUSA in Cincinnati for many years and is still stationed down there, and he's in charge of basically anything criminal. Everything kind of goes through him underneath from all of the 3 offices. We have Doug Squires, who many of you may know, who is our senior litigation counsel, who is kind of our subject matter expertise when it comes to anything from Giglio to e-litigation. He's in sport mode. He also still tries a lot of cases because he wants to, and he's very good at it. Jessica Gurley is not an attorney. She's our administrative officer, and we have about, I think, 12 people that are part of our administrative office who are not attorneys. And then Matt Horowitz is now the head of our civil division for the district, and that was Mark D'Alessandro for a number of years. Matt just took over with Mark's retirement. And then Annie Malik is our deputy chief. So Matt's in Cincinnati, and so directly supervises everybody, but for the most part here in Columbus, Andy's supervising them. And then you have, for each of the cities, you have a deputy criminal chief and then an assistant deputy criminal chief. And this is a bit different from all the offices. This is something that I put in place based on, we have a tiered system of cases. So we designate cases by tiers. There's tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1. Tier 3 cases are the vast majority of our cases, which are anything from immigration to possession of a firearm by convicted felon, low-level drug cases, low-level fraud cases. And those are actually being supervised and approved through, in Dayton, it would be Laura Clemens, who is the assistant deputy criminal chief. They also are direct supervisors of support staff, all of our paralegals and legal assistants. And they kind of run the day-to-day activity within the office. The deputy criminal chiefs, they kind of run everything outside the office. So they represent us to all of our agencies, the FBI, DA, Columbus Police, They also represent us to the judiciary, and they deal with any defense bar to a large extent. And they deal with the tier 2 and 3 cases, which are the more complicated, sophisticated, sometimes high profile cases. And the tier 2 cases, they approve those cases through Carl. So Carl Caden sees every tier 2 indictment or plea or charging document before it's approved, which are the fewer. The tier 1 cases go directly to me. So they're designated tier 1, and they have to be approved by me as far as any plea or an indictment. And you're talking about corruption cases, capital murder cases, large-scale RICO or espionage cases, terrorism cases, or those are sort of cases that often have clearance, TS clearance sort of cases. So that's kind of the structure. That's how the office works for the most part. We have a lot of different, based on we have no Indian country, so we aren't concerned about that. We have been asked, I can tell you lately, to do a lot more, Columbus in particular, cases in the international realm. Cases that don't even touch on the Southern District of Ohio. I think there's kind of a misconception that there's some sort of particular district that does all sort of cases that are international. That's not the case. Eastern District of Virginia, Southern District of New York are traditionally, but cities like Columbus, Nashville, and Austin have been asked to do a lot more. That's why I spent 2 weeks in Bogota, a couple of years ago. So we're doing a lot more of those sort of cases where we are not even, doesn't even necessarily touch on the Southern District of Ohio. It's just crimes coming into the United States by organizations, criminal cartels for the most part, from the South.
Well, great. Well, I think the audience has probably had their fill of org charts, but so I promise this is the last one. But this just gives you the breakdown for how the civil division in DC at Main Justice is organized. I'll just spend a couple of minutes on it. There are 6 main branches. One I'll highlight is the one in red, the Federal Programs Branch. I really enjoyed working with all these lawyers. They're outstanding career government lawyers across the division. But the Federal Programs Branch is the branch that's charged with defending all the major challenges to federal programs by its name, but to various aspects of federal law. So whether it's an executive order or an agency reg that's issued, federal programs are the ones in the district courts that will go in to defend those cases. And their job is really tough because oftentimes these are pretty high profile initiatives, so the cases are followed pretty closely. 2, they can be very complicated. If you have a reg that Department of Energy has been working on for a couple of years, it can be quite intense, both understanding the law and the industry that's involved. And then 3, a lot of these cases get litigated in a preliminary injunction context. So a rule gets enacted, and a week later, a law firm or a group has challenged it, and 3 weeks later, there's a preliminary injunction hearing. And these lawyers have to get up to speed and know the case, and then be able to stand up and defend the federal action in the case. So I really admired all the lawyers, but especially those lawyers who were just under the gun to defend really high-profile policies in short order. And then the appellate staff, which is on the far left here, but that group oversees almost all appeals that come out of the civil division, but the high-profile ones are the ones coming from the Federal Programs Branch. The Office of Immigration Litigation handles primarily removal cases, and it's mostly made up of appellate lawyers. So removal proceedings are started through administrative agencies, up through the Board of Immigration Appeals, and then cases get appealed to the various federal circuits, and there are thousands of cases around the country where those matters are pending in the various circuits. The Consumer Litigation Branch does financial litigation and other types of litigation involving the United States. But the one area that probably many of you are familiar with is the False Claims Act. They do False Claims Act enforcement in the Commercial Litigation Branch, and most of those cases are done in conjunction with the local U.S. Attorney's Office. One, maybe Washington takes the lead, maybe the local office takes the lead, but there's a lot of partnering there. And the Consumer Protection Branch was probably the one branch where, whatever your politics were, you sort of applauded the work they did. They were enforcing the laws that protected individuals from being harmed, typically by companies, whether it was like a proxy liability type situation, whether it was financial fraud, for example, elder fraud. We had a big elder fraud initiative under General Sessions because the elderly are targeted in these mail and phone and email schemes for billions of dollars a year. It's really quite sad. And they were involved with opioid enforcement. And I think since I left, they've been involved with CARES Act enforcement of groups that are getting monies under the CARES Act that shouldn't or otherwise abusing the privileges made available there. So as you can see, I was ultimately the principal deputy, and Jody Hunt was eventually, after about a year and a half or so, me leading the division, was confirmed by the Senate to lead the civil division. Quick story: my boss, Jody was the chief of staff for General Sessions before he became the leader of the civil division. But my boss originally was going to be a lawyer by the name of George Conway. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a fairly well-known New York lawyer, and then became a sort of nationally known political pundit. And he was going to be nominated, and then I'd met him a few times. Then at some point he mentioned he was going to not go through with it, and I didn't know why at the time, but that's probably become fairly obvious in the years that followed. But as a result of that, it took longer to get a Senate confirmed head, and so to my benefit, I was able to lead the division for longer than I otherwise would have been able to do. This is the last slide. This is a picture from the first argument I did when I was at DOJ as the acting head of the civil division. It was an executive order regarding sanctuary cities, and we were sued in San Francisco, which happened quite a bit. That was a pretty familiar place for us to go and litigate these big national policies. So this is the courtroom, the line leading into the courtroom. And one of the things I just really appreciated, and I know Dave does too on a local level, is that the cases you work on are oftentimes in the news and are being followed by quite a few people. And so as a litigator, whatever your sort of view is on an issue or an area of law or a policy, it's just fun to work on cases that have, people are interested in. And that described a lot of the cases I worked on. The one challenge was that while the courtroom was almost always full when I was there to argue a case, but the people who came typically were not there to support the government. So that's not how it works. The people who show up are usually there supporting the side challenging the government. And so for me, it sort of felt like every time I went to court, it was like a football team where every game was on the road. You never had the home court advantage or the home field advantage, and which made it fun. But when the judge is kind of pressing you, which I can appreciate now in my new job, but when the judge is pressing you a little bit, the audience sort of laughs with them, and sometimes at your expense. But what I will say about this case, this is the first time I got to stand up in court and say I was there on behalf of the United States. And I just can't tell you how proud I was and what a thrill that was. It's something Dave's been able to do many times, but this was my first time, and it just was such a privilege to stand up and represent the United States. For that case in particular, that was probably the high point of the argument. I think things went downhill from there, but it was defending the administration's sanctuary cities laws in a court in San Francisco. So in that sense, it was a challenge, but just a real privilege. Dave, anything you want to add before we take questions?
No, Judge, I'm ready for questions.
All right. Well, Robert, fire away.
All right. Well, thank you, Judge Readler and Mr. DeVillers for a very interesting presentation. We've got a couple of questions already in the queue. I just wanted to remind listeners and viewers that you can participate using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So leading off with a question for Judge Readler, we have a new administration that is just getting settled in Washington at the DOJ. Given your experience in the early days of the Trump administration, if you can extrapolate, what are the sorts of decisions that a new acting assistant AG of the civil division will be making in the coming days and weeks?
That's a great question. So, it's probably fair to say there were some unique aspects to the Trump administration that maybe won't be repeated in other administrations. But generally, I mean, the Biden team is a pretty experienced team, it seems like, coming into different jobs. And at the DOJ level in a litigating division, you have a number of pending cases that are at various levels of the court process, either in the trial court or the Court of Appeals. And some of those are pretty high-profile policies where the incoming administration might disagree with the legal position that was taken by the prior administration. So I think the first priority is to figure out what are the important cases and what does the new administration think about them, and that would be mainly the Attorney General or whoever the acting Attorney General is at that time. And how, what is the department going to change its position? Is it going to deviate some ways? Is it going to withdraw a case depending upon the case? So you just have kind of a new perspective. And in most cases, the United States position is going to be the same. Doesn't matter who the president is. But there are some high-profile cases where you do need to sort of reassess what your position is going to be. The administration was criticized because the SGs office changed their position in 4 cases that were pending in the Supreme Court, where I guess the Obama administration taking one position at some point, and then the Trump administration under General Sessions took a different position. I think one of those may have been the Husted case in Ohio that Judge Murphy argued as the state solicitor. So there was some criticism leveled for switching position, which is fair. But I should note that the United States won all 4 of those cases, or the position it ultimately supported under the last administration did prevail. So when they switched position, it was to one that ultimately ended up being the succeeding position in the Supreme Court.
The next question I have is for Mr. DeVillers. You mentioned that you had extensive experience going back, I believe, to '92 as an AUSA. What? So obviously you knew something of what you were getting into, but what surprised you most about the position of U.S. Attorney when you took that particular position? What was unanticipated, given your prior experience, about your new position as U.S. Attorney?
Without getting any specifics, kind of looked at our priorities. We knew our priorities were going to be fentanyl is a huge problem, and we also know that violent crime was ticking up. And while I knew about some of the things before I was even confirmed, I was read in on some of the things. Ben Glassman, who was my predecessor, was great about working, and a good friend, working together, kind of coming back up with strategies and certain things. But corruption, I think corruption was the biggest surprise to me, the cases that we were building.
Excellent. The next question is for Judge Readler from Jack Etheridge. Judge Readler, first, I'm proud that it was you representing the United States in San Francisco, just as you were proud to do so. Please describe the most enjoyable case you worked on and why. Well,
that's difficult in the sense that there were so many great cases and they were enjoyable for different reasons. But I probably would, enjoyable isn't the word I'd always use, but the travel ban litigation was probably a case that I spent part of every day of my first 6 months or so on the job thinking about and working on. As I said, the travel ban itself was issued the Friday before I started. The initial Ninth Circuit argument on the first travel ban was the next week. I didn't handle that case. But then when the second version was issued, I defended it in district court a couple of times, as did the acting Solicitor General at the time, just to give you a sense of how important the case was. It's pretty rare for the Solicitor General's office to appear even in the Court of Appeals, let alone the district court. And then a third version was issued, and that ultimately went to the Supreme Court. So there were a lot of, on both sides, there were a lot of blood, sweat, and tears spent on litigating that case in particular. It was a hard case, both legally and then obviously very deep policy disagreements. And I think the incoming administration has now reversed what's called the travel ban. So that's now, I guess, a relic of history. But just to see that case from the start and to argue in the district court, and actually, I'm not going to do my own horn. I lost a lot of cases. My record was probably under 500 by a bit. But I did win the travel ban once in the district court. And other than that win, there weren't a lot of wins until we got to the Supreme Court. So I think that case probably, just given that it touched so much of my initial time at the department, was the one I will remember kind of the most going forward. And I went to the oral argument in the Supreme Court, and Juan Lynn Miranda, I can't pronounce his name, but the director, creator of Hamilton, sat like a seat in front of me at the Supreme Court. So that was pretty memorable too.
Excellent. Next question is for Mr. DeVillers. Do you have any advice for attorneys that have significant law enforcement and or state prosecutor experience that may be interested in working at the DOJ or in the Southern District of Ohio?
Yeah, that's a lot what we look for. I mean, we look for two kind of types of individuals, at least I do, and I think most U.S. attorneys do, are people with extensive criminal litigation experience, either your county prosecutors, attorney general, individuals that actually have litigated a lot of cases. And then we look for individuals that are kind of the law clerk sort of angle that has the experience with substantive case law and working with the judges. So if you've got experience at the county position litigating felonies, you're in a pretty good position as it is. That's what I usually advise people that want to become U.S. attorney is to go to a county or clerk for a judge one of those two things. JAG Corps is another one. You do that for a few years, and then you're in a pretty good, do a good job, and you're in a pretty good position to become an AUSA.
Very good. Next question is for Judge Readler. What is the relationship between OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, and the White House Counsel's Office?
That's a great question. So I'll talk about the role of OLC and White House Counsel, but also DOJ more broadly. So the White House Counsel's Office, it's about 30-ish lawyers who represent the office of the President of the United States. And so they are giving direct legal advice to the President, and they are essentially overseeing all legal issues that impact the administration. But by design, the Department of Justice, again, is the one that determines the legal position of the United States and is litigating cases. And so OLC gives advice to the President, maybe through the White House Counsel's Office, that, again, is effectively binding on the President. Now, the President, of course, hires the Attorney General and can remove the Attorney General at will. And so there can always be some play in the joints on certain things. But I think every Attorney General over time has given lots of advice to the White House that the White House has effectively accepted, but maybe not warmly accepted. And that's sort of the role that the department plays, which, as a historical matter, is I think really something to admire. The White House Counsel's Office, though, does work on the criminal side, I should say, and Dave can talk about this more, but criminal matters, there's a long history of investigations, the White House not being involved. But on civil matters, it's permissible for the White House to be involved. There's a chain of command in terms of who talks to who. And so typically, White House Counsel's Office would be talking to people above my level, like the Associate Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General, about specific matters when I was there, and I would work through the Associate Attorney General. But on civil matters, it's common to get a sense of the White House's view, because oftentimes the high-profile cases are policy initiatives issued or set by the White House, and so we would want their input on how a case might proceed, or what we might argue, or if there'll be additional action taken by an agency, for example. And then the other thing, the White House Counsel's Office, there's a lot of things they do, but if there is, I told you that the Department of Justice determines legal position in the United States, but if there's a deep conflict between DOJ and an agency, where maybe even it gets to the cabinet level, where the secretaries disagree about something, the White House Counsel's Office can be involved in helping broker a resolution of how something's going to be addressed.
Excellent. The judge mentioned a couple of things where he sort of nodded to you, Mr. DeVillers. Did you want to add anything in terms of the relationship between the White House Counsel's Office?
Yeah, I can say, as far as criminally goes, that I've never had a contact on any criminal case with any White House Counsel's Office, either as an AUSA or as a U.S. attorney.
All right. I see we're slightly over time, so this will have to be the last question, and it goes to Mr. DeVillers from Andrew Smith. It seems the U.S. attorney offices are mostly about criminal law. Can Mr. DeVillers explain again what the civil law people do in his office?
Yeah, it really isn't. We do a lot of civil stuff. It just doesn't make the papers. It's not the interesting stuff to a large extent, but some of it really is. What we do is we represent the United States for the most part for any sort of case, either when we are being sued or affirmatively. One of the things that we do a lot of is our affirmative asset recovery, which is civil, where we're trying to get money for victims of crimes, for restitution. We try to get assets that individuals have they're trying to hide, and that's mostly through civil. But then, of course, we represent the post office. We represent the FBI, the courts. We represent the military base in Dayton. So they do a lot of tough work. We do some affirmative stuff where we're sue individuals. We work with the EPA. We work with other federal agencies to make sure that people are following their rules and not breaking it civilly. Again, as Judge Readler talked about with the opioid issues, we have a lot of lawsuits pending, both with DEA enforcement and ourselves in regards to enforcing some of the ensuing some of these pharmaceuticals and doctors and things of that nature, both criminally and civilly.
Would you say the office is maybe 3/4 lawyers doing sort of criminal type work and 1/4-ish?
Yeah, I would agree. Yes, Judge.
Yeah, when I speak to new USAs, they sometimes come to Washington in the Great Hall, and there'd be a panel that would speak. And if I asked them to sort of raise their hands, it was usually a quarter civil, 3/4 criminal. I always said, showing my bias, that just meant that the civil division was more selective. But I suspect I get a lot of pushback on that. So just leave it there.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Judge and Mr. DeVillers, for a very engaging presentation. I think we all learned a lot about the inner workings of the Justice Department and about the Southern District here in Ohio, at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Once again, thank all of you for joining us for this presentation. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, we stand adjourned.